This is Green Tide Rising, a podcast following Latin America's green wave abortion rights movement.
And how it's unveiling a blueprint for global reproductive freedom.
I'm Monica Morales Garcia.
And I'm Asha Dyer. A quick audience advisory warning here before we get started. Sexual violence and gender violence are mentioned in today's episode. Please take care while listening.
Estamos en la Plaza de Mayo.
We are in Plaza de Mayo, part of a national campaign demanding Belén's freedom.
El día 14 de abril.
On April 14th, 2016, I went to the prison for an interview.
On a Thursday morning in the northern region of Argentina, feminist lawyer Soledad Deza visited a woman named Belén in jail.
No fue fácil verla a ella porque a la cárcel.
It wasn't easy to see her, because lawyers and family can only visit jail on certain days. So when I first went, they wouldn't let me in.
No me dejaron pasar.
Soledad tells us it wasn't easy to see Belén that very first time. She wasn't her lawyer yet, so she wasn't allowed past the gates.
Dejé mi tarjeta y luego.
I left my card, and later her mother told me that Belén was waiting for my visit. And so I met her mother on a Friday, and I was finally able to speak with Belén on Saturday.
Finalmente hablar con ella un día sábado.
She left her card, hoping someone would call her back. And by Friday, she was in contact with Belén's mother, and on Saturday, Belén was expecting her.
Me encontré con una Belén completamente.
I met a Belén who was completely convinced that what was happening to her was fair and just, that it was her destiny. I met a Belén who wouldn't look me in the eyes, with a Belén who was truly convinced that she had done something bad and she deserved to be where she was.
Que había hecho algo malo y que merecía estar donde estaba.
You should know, Belén is not her real name. It's a pseudonym the feminist movement gave to her for protection. Belén was accused of self-inducing an abortion. When Soledad visited her, Belén was in pre-trial detention on charges of aggravated murder, which entails a penalty of up to 25 years. And she'd already been detained for over 2.
Me acuerdo que charlamos mucho, lloramos mucho ese día. Yo llegué a las 8 de la mañana y me fui a las 12 del mediodía.
Soledad and Belén talked and cried for 4 hours that first day.
Bueno, para mí ese día sábado fue.
For me, that Saturday was powerful, because prison is an ugly place. But more than that, seeing her believe she was guilty, that was ugly.
Culpabilizada, ¿no?
When Soledad finally saw Belén for the first time, Belén couldn't look her in the eyes. She was defeated. None of her brothers or her father came to visit her in jail. She was starting to believe that she deserved this. But before leaving, Soledad gave Belén a book.
Yo le llevé un libro.
I brought her a book about the case of Maria Magdalena.
Soledad thought it would be good for Belén to read a case just like hers, where a woman's obstetric emergency was criminalized, but who didn't end up incarcerated.
Creo que pude mostrarle en el caso de María Magdalena.
I thought I could show her, using the case of Maria Magdalena, a fair version that Belén hadn't had for herself. When I returned on Monday, I found her much more dignified, is how I would put it.
Mucho más digna, por decirlo de alguna forma, ¿no?
2 days passed, and by Monday, Belén was reinvigorated. She was able to understand that she did not kill her baby. She didn't even know she was pregnant. Belén's sentencing was to take place on Tuesday, and even though Soledad wasn't her lawyer, together, they wrote Belén's last statements to the judge.
En esas últimas palabras pudo.
In these last words, she was able to humanize what had occurred. After seeing that the same thing had happened to other women too, she was able to tell her story from a place of justice for herself.
Contó su verdad, ¿no? Lo hizo conectada con otro lugar de justicia y de reclamo de justicia para sí, ¿no?
Belén's words to the judge were powerful. She was able to tell the story that she had already told so many times before. But this time, she had a sense of justice behind her words. And she truly believed, she knew that she could not have killed her baby.
Luego también de sentir...
She also felt that she had a lawyer who would defend her, even if she was condemned the following day.
Al día siguiente la condenaran.
The next day, on 19th of April 2016, after Belén's last words, the conservative Tucumán government sentenced Belén to 8 years in prison for murder. But that was just the beginning. By the time that Belén was released, together they started a movement.
Entonces...
Yes, well, this was the start of our journey together.
This is Green Tide Rising. Stay with us.
Belén es una joven tucumana que está presa desde hace más de 2 años y 4 meses. Recién en abril pasado fue condenada a prisión por el solo hecho de
Back in December 2020, in the birthplace of the Pope, Argentina passed a historic law enabling the legal termination of pregnancy up to 14 weeks. It was the first country in Latin America to legalize abortion. This decision sent a powerful message to feminist leaders and organizers about what was possible for the Green Wave.
The 2020 decision rippled through Latin America and the Caribbean. Activists packed streets, filed lawsuits, and flew green bandanas from the tip of Argentina to the northernmost border in Mexico. Today, 3 of the largest countries in Latin America have decriminalized abortion. But here in the US, things have gotten progressively worse.
There was a celebratory atmosphere in the governor's office as he signed the bill restricting abortions.
Our debate bill is now law in the Lone Star State.
In 1973, the Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade functionally legalized abortion in the US. It's had ripple effects throughout the globe. And in Latin America specifically, people looked up to the law. Having the legal right to choose if, when, how, and with whom to start a family is a crucial step towards bodily autonomy. From a legal standpoint, Roe was in some ways enviable. I mean, clearly, all of that was fantasy because today, 41 out of 50 US states have varying degrees of abortion restrictions. But stay with us here.
Since the passing of Roe, conservative anti-abortion groups have been working relentlessly to take abortion access away. And they did. In very recent history, we witnessed Senate leader Mitch McConnell stop former President Obama from putting his liberal nominee on the Supreme Court. Then we watched Hillary Clinton lose the 2016 election to former President Donald Trump. Then we saw the Republican Party get not 1, not 2, but 3 conservative Supreme Court justices on the bench.
Then liberal Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, turning over the majority to the conservative justices and creating the most conservative court in over 90 years. Just shy of the 50th anniversary of Roe, the Supreme Court decision of Dobbs v. Jackson reversed Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which originally asserted the fundamental right to an abortion before viability of a fetus. With Dobbs, the conservative-leaning Supreme Court decided the Constitution does not give you the right to an abortion. Actually, the authority to regulate abortion is, quote, returned to the people and their elected representatives, with an emphasis on elected representatives. And so, with that, the enviable reproductive rights standard was shattered. And the U.S. could no longer be seen as a leader in the fight for gender equity.
But 5,600 miles away in South America, something very different and exciting was happening. From 2020 to now, the Green Wave movement has gone from having almost no exceptions to abortion to now having some of the most progressive abortion policies in the world.
So, in a countdown to the 2024 US presidential election, there is a lot we can learn from Latin America and the Caribbean. Remember, abortion is on at least 7 state ballots, including Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Maryland, New York, Nevada, and South Dakota. And in this election, Latinos matter. The latest research from Latino polling org X shows that Latino voters are going to have a big impact on this upcoming election, specifically through these state ballot measures. What I'm trying to say is that Latinos, we could determine the future of abortion access in this country. I mean, no big deal. So here we are, dropping 8 episodes following the Green Wave movement in Latin America, focusing on the stories, women, lawyers, advocates, and other symbolic figures who've turned reproductive rights into a political feminist movement.
With the help and access of renowned feminist lawyer and sexual and reproductive rights advocate, Ximena Casas, we were able to speak with some of the most brilliant minds in the movement.
Ximena is embarking on a first-of-its-kind research project, tracking the impact of abortion criminalization across Latin America and in the Caribbean, looking at decades worth of data and stories,
and the way Green Wave leaders are making significant progress amidst hostile political and religious landscapes. We will speak with Ximena at the end of this episode and every episode, where she will share ways in which each of us can implement the fight for reproductive freedom and bodily autonomy.
So, be sure to listen all the way through to the end of this episode to hear Ximena's call to action. For this first episode, we begin in the birthplace of the Green Wave, Argentina.
Mi nombre es Marta Alaniz.
This is Marta Alaniz. She's the founder of the Argentina chapter Catolica por el Derecho de Decidir, Catholics for the Right to Decide. It's a movement of Catholic feminists who are committed to the defense of human rights. They focus on sexuality, reproduction, and for life to be free of gender violence and discrimination. But we're speaking with Marta today because she is the icon and elder who first thought of the green bandana, the most visible symbol in the Green Wave.
Since 2003, 4, and 5, I have been promoting the national campaign for the right to abortion. And I am a bit old, so I have a lot of life to talk about.
In 2003, Marta founded Catolica's. And like she says, she's lived many lives.
I have been a fierce participant in social and political organizations since I was very young.
Marta has been an activist for a long time. She's 74 right now, but back in her 20s, during the Argentinian dictatorship of the 70s and 80s, she was exiled from Argentina for her political beliefs.
In fact, I had to leave in exile with my family because we were facing many risks inside the country.
There's the painful legacy of the so-called dirty war waged by the military against left-wing guerrillas. At least 9,000 people simply disappeared, now presumed dead.
In Argentina
there was a dictatorship, which people need to know about. Perhaps some young people don't know about it, but it was a very cruel dictatorship. Many people died, thousands of people. Thousands were put in jail, and 30,000 people disappeared.
Y tuvimos 30,000 personas desaparecidas.
Under the guise of a war on communism, the ruling armed forces tortured and disappeared thousands of young left-wing students, activists, and militants, leaving a trail of devastation that would haunt the country for decades.
So, in 1976, the mothers of those who had disappeared started asking about their children. They went to the Plaza de Mayo, which is in front of the presidential palace.
As a result of thousands of disappeared, in 1976, the mothers of those missing children marched to the Plaza de Mayo, a historic public square in front of Argentina's congressional building, Casa Rosa. The public square has been the site of some of the most important events in the country's history.
They made a circle around the pyramid of the Plaza de Mayo, and they began to walk around it, waving their handkerchiefs in the air.
Armed guards told the women to leave, but the mothers began to circle around the Plaza de Mayo pyramid. It's one of the oldest monuments in the country, a symbol of the birth of Argentina.
They became known as the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, demanding their children.
The mothers, with their white bandanas in hand, demanded to know where their children were. Were they imprisoned, in exile, or were they killed?
My daughter was 5 months pregnant and when she was taken. My grandchild must have been born in August of last year. Even now, I have heard nothing about him. The only thing we know is that these children are Argentinian.
Argentina's Dirty War, a period of military dictatorship, finally ended in 1983. Many mothers never found their children or grandchildren, and the ones that are left, until this day, still protest on the Plaza de Mayo.
But the efforts of the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo led to the overthrow of the military dictatorship.
The mothers were instrumental in the end of the dictatorship, in part because of the power of the white bandana.
The white bandanas are untouchable because they are a symbol of the mothers.
The white bandana, she says, it's untouchable. How much can be said without saying anything at all? So, Marta picked up the phone, called a friend, and together, they thought of what the feminist movement needed back in 2003. And they were inspired by the mothers.
So, the idea of the bandana arose from the white bandanas that the mothers used. But those few who remain are still using white. But I had the idea of the bandanas, and together with a colleague from Rosario, we decided to use the color green. But it was simple, like over the phone, just to see what would happen if we put something on a handkerchief, just like I'm using it now.
During the interview, Marta touched her green bandana that she had tied around her neck. It read, "Aborto legal para no morir," which means legal abortion so we don't die. It's pretty powerful. You can't miss the bright green color. We asked Marta, why green?
¿Por qué verde? Nosotras...
Why green? It's the color of health. It's the color of nature. It is a color which held significance to us.
Un color que nos parecía significativo.
She said it symbolized nature, growth, birth, life. Part of it was taking back life from the pro-life movement. And once they settled on the color of the bandana, they had to figure out, where the heck do we get these made?
Tuvimos que buscar cooperativas.
We had to find a women's cooperative who made clothing for companies and individuals.
Para particulares.
She found a local women's sewing cooperative. Now, these women normally made uniforms for local businesses, or they worked as seamstresses and tailors. They didn't typically make bandanas, but they agreed to make the pañuelos verdes.
En Rosario,
Yes, I took care of bringing the handkerchiefs. We decided on them with a few colleagues. We made them together with the Catholic colleagues. There were only a few handkerchiefs. Well, whether it's 2,000 or 3,000, it was still a small number compared to the amount of women who gathered at these events.
That first time, they only ordered 2,000 to 3,000 bandanas. They didn't know they would be so popular.
A year passed, and I couldn't take it anymore because there was an increasing demand for bandanas.
But after a year, the women couldn't keep up. The demand for green bandanas was outpacing their production.
And we had to cross the border to Bolivia to buy green fabric. We needed to get green fabric.
No teníamos tela verde.
And even when these women could keep up with demand of green bandanas, they would run out of fabric and would have to make trips out of the country to Bolivia, which shares Argentina's northern border, a conservative region of the country.
Pero fue un proceso muy colectivo.
But it was a very collective, very, very emotional process, with many women participating, young and old. And although the work was hard, we were very happy marching in the streets and demanding our rights.
Marchando en las calles y reclamando nuestros derechos.
Marta remembers that time fondly. It was young women, old women, all kinds of different people marching together for their rights. And less than 2 years later, activists in every single Argentine province launched the campaign demanding abortion on request during the first trimester.
Y al año siguiente,
And the following year, in 2004, it was decided to launch a national campaign for this right.
From 2005 onward, the Green Wave grew significantly. There were more organizations, more support from important political and cultural figures. The number and size of protests grew, and media presence and public opinion grew in support of abortion. Women who faced criminalization because of a pregnancy became the faces and stories of the movement.
Me llamo Norma Beatriz. En el año 2000 me criminalizaron
Mi nombre es
por
Débora
aborto
y en
y
2005 fui criminalizada por aborto y asociación.
Soy doña Belén. En el año 1990.
And by 2018, over a decade later, Argentina drew closer than ever before to legalizing abortion.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves here because before abortion was legal in Argentina, it was mainly low-income women that suffered the consequences of the lack of access to safe abortion services. And as a result, it was women on the margins that disproportionately died and were criminalized due to obstetric emergencies. Belén spent over 2 years in jail because of an obstetric emergency. Here is Soledad Deza, her lawyer who we heard from earlier.
Belén, la noche del...
Belén, on the night of April 21st, 2014, she felt unwell. Her stomach hurt. So in the early morning, she went to Hospital Avellaneda with her mother.
Late night in April 2014, Belén wasn't feeling well. She was known to overindulge on sweets, so she thought, it'll pass, it's just a little stomach ache, and went to bed. But around 4 a.m., Belén's mother rushed her to the local hospital.
When she arrived at the hospital, she was diagnosed with an acute abdomen. She was given medication for that, and after a few hours, she had a hemorrhage.
When Belén got to the hospital, doctors diagnosed her with a stomach ache, and they gave her medication. Hours later, Belén began hemorrhaging.
And they took her to the operating room to perform a dilation and curettage. As she was being taken into the operating room, the doctors told Belén's mother that she was having a miscarriage.
They rushed Belén to emergency surgery. The doctors told Belén's mother that she was having a miscarriage. And that was just the first story they told.
But later, when a fetus was found a few hours after the surgery in one of the bathrooms, they linked her to that fetus without any kind of examination or evidence. She ends up being accused of aggravated homicide by relationship.
Hours later, the hospital found what they said was a fetus in the bathroom. And without any test, they told Belén, this is yours and you've been suspected of having intentionally provoked an abortion.
She did not know she was pregnant, and she went directly to the penitentiary from the hospital, where she spent 29 months due to this obstetric emergency.
Belén came into the hospital thinking she just ate too much candy. She didn't know she was pregnant, and she didn't know she was miscarrying. It took 4 days for her to recover. But by 8 a.m. the same day she came into the hospital, there was an armed guard waiting to take her to jail.
She was hospitalized for 4 days. She arrived on the morning of the 21st, and on the 4th day, after she managed to recover, they discharged her. In other words, they sent her to prison.
After she was discharged, she was put into state custody. Belén would spend 29 months incarcerated because of an obstetric emergency.
Hasta que conseguimos la libertad de
Until we
Belén,
achieved Belén's release, I felt incredibly distressed, very distressed. At times, I was convinced that we would secure her freedom. Other times, I received comments that we could not. I was experiencing it with a lot of anguish and a heavy sense of responsibility. I felt profoundly indebted to her and, through her, to other women who could have been in the same situation.
You see, it's very easy to get into the criminal justice system, but it's a lot harder to find your way out of it. As a result of Belén's case, the hashtag Ni Una Menos movement, which kicked off in 2015, demanded all women in Argentina be given the right to legal, safe, and free abortions, and demanded doctors stop criminalizing women who seek to make decisions about their bodies.
Asha, I think we need to slow down a little bit, and we need to do a quick GTR-splaining here.
You know what? Good point, Monica. So, Ni Una Menos, translated to Not One Less, began as an anti-femicide, anti-gender violence movement after a 14-year-old pregnant girl was beaten to death by her boyfriend because she wanted to keep the baby and he did not, sparking over 200,000 people in Buenos Aires to protest this horrific act. This movement eventually expanded to include and champion all rights to bodily autonomy and freedom for women and girls, including the right to abortion. Belén's case galvanized local opinion against Argentina's restrictive abortion law. It opened doors for people to have conversations about women's bodily autonomy. On March 27, 2017, the Supreme Court of the province of Tucumán unanimously acquitted Belén.
And 1 year later, the first debates about abortion reached the Senate.
It was significant because the national campaign for legal, safe, and free abortion had been presenting the project since 2003. Well, 15 years later, it finally made it onto the parliamentary agenda.
This was the sixth time in over 15 years that feminists tried to bring the case to the Senate.
What was I doing? I was with the same organization I'm with now, the Women for Women Foundation in Tucumán. I was invited to speak as a presenter, primarily because of this invitation.
2018 marked a point of no return. You couldn't deny the green wave. And at that moment, Congress had a choice. They could conserve statutes that criminalized abortion, or they could make history and decriminalize and legalize abortion. Thousands of people gathered at the Plaza de Mayo in 2018 in support over a bill that would decriminalize the procedure. Photographs of the day show thousands of green bandanas waving in the air. It was a green wave.
And we were not aware that the bandana would take off and cross borders, or that millions of women in Argentina would use it. It was almost a private act, let's say, by a group of people who decided to distribute handkerchiefs at a gathering. But we were not aware of how far the handkerchief would reach.
During those 2018 marches, it was clear that the green bandana was here to stay. But Marta didn't know that her small idea that she had on a phone call with friends would be shared by millions and millions and millions of people. She didn't know that the green bandana would cross borders and find its way to Chile, to Colombia, and Peru. But after hours of debate in the Senate,
Negative votes, 38. Affirmative votes, 31. This was the vote for the general approval.
The bill was narrowly defeated.
The law will not pass tonight. But look, I want to tell everyone that it won't be this year. It will be the next year or the year after. The issue of abortion exists in Argentina. It happens. Whether we agree or not, it happens.
Though the case ultimately failed, that moment, it galvanized the feminist movement.
Como no hubo aprobación en el Senado,
since there was no approval in the Senate,
quedó archivado.
That bill was shelved until
Hasta el año
2020,
en el que cambia el gobierno.
It wasn't until 2019, during an election, when the ruling party was changing. And one of the candidates for president was Alberto Fernández. He caught on to the momentum of the Green Wave. Here he is during his 2019 presidential debate.
En Argentina los abortos ocurren.
In Argentina, abortions happen, and the truth is that continuing to punish it only criminalizes the behavior and makes everything go underground. We need to move towards legalization, because with legalization, we will give poor women the opportunity to have their abortions under sanitary conditions, just as wealthy women do in major clinics. You know what I ask of you? Let's end the hypocrisy.
He ran on women's rights, and he promised that if he was elected, rich and poor women would both have access to safe and legal abortion. Marta says that change in tone wasn't a coincidence.
La opinión pública.
The issue of abortion was not on the public agenda. We, as part of the movement, and with the journalists, put it there.
Periodistas.
As Marta puts it, it was the feminist movement who worked with friendly journalists who put stories like Belén's on the public's agenda.
Entonces, el apoyo del
So, government support was significant because it's one thing to allow a project to be discussed and quite another to have the government send forward its own project.
un proyecto propio.
It was the difference between a government that supports abortion and a government that doesn't that changed the reproductive rights cause. Sounds familiar, Monica? So, with all the work the feminist movement put in, Alberto Fernández, the pro-choice candidate, won the presidential election.
Argentina's new president, Alberto Fernández, drove himself to Congress to be sworn in on Tuesday.
Yo quiero ser el presidente que escucha.
I want to be the president who listens, the president of dialogue and agreement, to build a country which belongs to everyone.
After the speech, thousands of supporters waited for the new president in the historic Plaza de Mayo, right in front of the presidential palace.
Alberto Fernández was sworn in December 11, 2019. And 19 days later, the Senate was once again debating a bill that would legalize abortion for any reason up to 14 weeks. The Argentinian Senate debated for 12 hours. Debates got heated.
Y bueno, finalmente el 30 de diciembre.
And well, finally, on December 30th, when we were already preparing for the New Year's toast, Argentina approved legal, safe, and free abortion for all women and pregnant people.
Y personas gestantes.
It wasn't until late into the night when the Senate finally dropped their ruling. Green bandanas flew throughout Argentina. Women held on to each other and cried. They screamed.
14 de enero de
On January 14th of that same year, the law was enacted.
The law was signed by President Alberto Fernández on January 14th, 2021. In Argentina, the fourth largest country in the Americas, abortion was legal.
But 8 months after Argentina's abortion legislation was signed into law, the state of Texas implemented an abortion trigger ban in September 2021.
The anti-abortion movement was getting ready to pull off what they'd been working towards for almost 50 years.
Talking about the birth of the Green Wave movement in Latin America, while we also recall the end of an era of a federal abortion access in the United States. It's clear we're standing on rapidly shifting ground right now. There's so much we can learn from the global South, bringing these lessons to the global North, which is what we'll be doing throughout this series.
To help us with this mission, let's check in with our resident Green Wave expert, Ximena Casas, whose study looking at the impact of abortion criminalization across Latin America and the Caribbean is both a warning and a blueprint of sorts on how to fight back.
Hi, my name is Ximena Casas. I'm a feminist lawyer from Colombia, and I have been working on sexual and reproductive rights for the last 20 years, and this is my passion. So after working on sexual and reproductive rights for the last 20 years, I decided to start to look for a research that could help us identify if criminal law should be the adequate tool to regulate a health service as abortion. So the research project that I'm working on with Rios River documents how criminalization of abortion is having harmful consequences in 6 countries in Latin America by identifying patterns of human rights violations and how these violations impact women, girls, and pregnant people. So for me, the most important thing of the Green Wave is the sisterhood.
Marta Alaniz talked about the creation of the green bandana. Ximena, can you expand on the power of its symbolism today and what it means to you?
Our green bandana is our symbol of resistance and empowerment and is now becoming a global symbol. By wearing the green bandana in our bags or in our hand or whatever we want, we can recognize each other without saying any word. Is this green bandana that makes us feel that we are part of a movement, that is a movement that goes beyond borders and that we stand up for healthy families, healthy pregnancies, and desired motherhoods. And we are defending our human rights and our dignity. So I will invite listeners to start wearing this green bandana.
Abortion storytelling is so important, but in many cases, like Belén's, anonymity is required for safety. How is personal storytelling a vital component to legal cases like those you've been researching?
I think anonymity is important for our fight. It helps us understand how whispered the impact of abortion stigma is in our societies. I think what is powerful about Belén is her story without having her face, which unfortunately is something that is not unique and has happened to many. And we have learned from in the movement that data or well-developed legal arguments or the international human rights standards are not enough to generate this empathy among the society on this issue that has been highly stigmatized. So I think that's why we need stories as the Belén to humanize these struggles that pregnant people face with the criminalization.
So what has changed in Argentina since abortion was legalized in 2020? And what is at stake today under a new right-wing president, Javier Milei, which is also something we should be taking note of if Trump wins in November?
Since the law was passed in Argentina, the number of public health institutions that provide access to abortion has doubled, and that there have not been any case of maternal death due to abortion. So I think these numbers really talks about the success of the implementation of the law and the importance to guarantee comprehensive access to sexual and reproductive health services. It contradicts, for example, what we are seeing in Argentina with Milei's proposal to repeal the Argentina abortion law, or as we are seeing with the Trump narrative in the US, that it shows us how we find ourselves facing and increasing this anti-gender discourse that seeks to delegitimize the victories of the women's rights movement and the LGBTQ plus movements that we are having in our fight for our rights. And that if we see the data, we see that actually it works, which contradicts this narrative that Trump or Milei are trying to impose.
It's a reminder that even when laws change in our favor, we can't just relax. Presidents come and go, and the pendulum keeps swinging. So can people-led movements help to steady the shifting ground?
Passing a law is not the end of our fight. is one step forward, is a step forward of the recognition of the law, because as always, our rights and these legal and social debates are in a pendulum. And we cannot take for granted that the bill has passed, we have won, and everything has finished. So the green wave can have many, many green tones, and because of that, we'll have something to contribute in this fight for reproductive autonomy and for reproductive justice.
Thank you for listening to episode 1 of Green Tide Rising. Stay tuned because in episode 2, we're heading to El Salvador to speak with a woman who was imprisoned for almost a decade for an obstetric emergency, who has chosen to speak out using her real name and image, and who today is an activist helping other women like her find freedom in a country where all abortion is illegal, no exceptions.
A partir de allí, pues me acusaron de que yo había asesinado a mi recién nacida.
That's next time on Green Tide Rising.
This episode was produced and written by Monica Morales Garcia.
Special thanks to Ximena Casas.
Green Tide Rising is executive produced by Jess Jacobs and Leela Meadow-Connor, with associate producer Adi Biaringer.
And produced in partnership with Pod People.
Our theme music was composed by Andres Aspiri.
I'm your host, Monica Morales Garcia.
And I'm your host and executive producer, Asha Dyer.
Join us again on Green Tide Rising. And in the meantime, head over to our YouTube channel to watch and share our accompanying video series, Entonces. Link in the show notes.
You can also find us on social media and see more about this episode on our website, greentiderising.com. Subscribe and listen wherever you get your podcasts. Bye for now.
Adios.